Hi, I'm Sharaad Kuten and welcome to Let's Talk, the show that brings you the most important conversations of the day. Today we're going to be talking about the environment and the people who depend on it. That's essentially all of us. Because you've heard about the Kelantan blockade, we talk about microplastics and the pollution they're causing. In fact, continent of plastics out in the ocean. All of those, of course, impact us either directly or indirectly. Now, to talk about the issue of the environment in a Malaysian context, I have three wonderful guests. I'm very happy to have them. Yasmin Rasyid, she's from EcoKnights. It's the NGO devoted to environmental awareness and education. Also Elizabeth Wong, she's the State Assemblywoman for Bukit Lanjan, a former State EXCO involved in tourism, consumer affairs and the environment. And also Kamal Suhaimi Fazil, who's with University of Malay's Sociology and Anthropology Department, to talk about the development, the human side of the ecological issue. Thank you so much for joining me, all of you. Very excited because, and I know it's a huge topic and all of you represent very different facets of the issue. Elizabeth, can I begin with you and the question of a political perspective on this? You, of course, working in government, they're ideals, but they're also the practical implementation. What do you think politicians grapple with when they take on an issue as big as the environment?
I think for anyone in the position where one has to be in charge of environment or the environmental affairs, first of all, I mean, idealism is one thing, but the economy is equally important. So for anyone in that position, I would say preferably the person should be an activist, if not someone who can learn everything very quickly and and realize that we can have some form of balance between the economy as well as the environment.
Now, you were a two-term EXCO member with the same portfolio, is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. And we'll come back to some of the practical things that and the experiences that you had, because I think it's going to be a very interesting dimension to this conversation. Yasmin, you are president of EcoKnights, an NGO, again, environmental awareness. Tell us, how did you get into this side of activism? And what do you think the activists bring to the table?
I mean, I pretty much went into it quite accidentally. When I was younger, I never had any expectation of, leading an NGO, what more being an activist. I think it was very organic. I was a young graduate in environment, really gung-ho about the science, really was into research, looking for an opportunity to apply in this country. And in my last 20 years of experience, I've seen myself jumping from the environment science sphere, and now I'm inching towards more to the social science. And if I can summarize the last 2 decades of experience and work, despite all my knowledge about environmental issues, whether it's the cause or the pollution, policies, I think the fundamental things that I come across all the time are really basic human issues. Livelihood, making a living, poverty. And it really shed a really important perspective for me. Like, we've got to address these social issues first, in my humble opinion, and then look at how that can provide more alternative economic opportunities, maybe better ones. And then for me, I think the byproduct would be a protected environment.
Right, so there's a kind of interconnectedness. I mean, Kamal, are you surprised that Yasmin says that she's gone from the sciences and, and now is moving into the social sciences, where you're from? You're the Department of Anthropology and Sociology at University of Malaya. And you work also on the questions of Orang Asli concerns. Tell us, what's your perspective? I mean, as an academic, what do academics bring to the table when it comes to the question of the environment and the people involved?
So like Yasmin mentioned, she went from the science to the people. I went from the people to maybe to the science a little bit. So I was interested in Orang Asli and culture. But when I worked with the Orang Asli communities, or when I visited Orang Asli communities in the late 1990s, some of the things that I saw that got me interested in not so much research anymore. So I started thinking, I want to study culture. I want to look at how they look at life and stuff like that. But I went in there and I saw, marginalization, and I thought, okay, this is not right. People are being marginalized. The last village you come in has all the facilities and amenities. The moment you go to the Orang Asli village, you hit a dirt road, and everything else seems to go backwards from there. And so I was interested in rights from very early on. But over the years, you can't run away from the environment, because where they become impoverished is where they lose the environment.
Now, Elizabeth, because we've known each other for a long time, and I know you, before you became a politician, you were a human rights activist. But as a politician, knowing that there are all kinds of stakeholders involved in this conversation about the environment, not just your friends in the field of activism, what is it like juggling? I mean, what is it that you've had to tell them often to kind of find a bridge between the different stakeholders?
It's not a stable balance, because at the end of the day, any government, whether it is in Selangor or federal government, they have to make sure that they have enough money for the people. So, for example, when we started, when we were in government in 2008, we realized that there were certain things that, in fact, Selangor had a luxury, compared to other states. We were richer than other states. So we were able to, for example, declare a moratorium on commercial logging, because we realized, we worked out the numbers. We had to do a lot of accounting, a lot of paperwork. We realized we can afford it. And then we realized that we can afford to continue to gazette green lungs. And I think it's a luxury compared to many other states. Yeah. So I was lucky, we are very lucky in Selangor, but we also have to look at how we can replicate that in the rest of the states.
Yeah, so what you're saying is, and you see this all the time, and when you use the word resources, it's resources for exploitation or revenue generation, as opposed to resources that we need to protect. They seem to be incompatible. When you try to educate people, Yasmin, how do you help them sort this out? The idea that our natural resources need both to be protected, but also can be exploited, in a reasonable way.
It's tough. I think it depends who you're talking to. If you're talking about a child or my own child, I would definitely look at embedding the values of protection first. And then when that child evolves its mindset to understand the basic of how the world runs, you've got to teach that, you got to tip that a little bit and try to put that balance in it. And I think that's pretty much the reality. The very much resources we protect is also the resource that provides for everyone. And truly what Ellie was saying as well, how do you deal with this intricacy of balancing, and without also forgetting that there's going to be more Malaysians in another 10, 20 years. There's going to be more of us, more mouths to feed. So at some point, land has got to be used very smartly. I don't have the answer. It's actually a very dynamic time now, looking at how the policies are rolling.
If I can jump in, sorry. I think, first of all, the government must have the political will to do it. Because, no matter what happens, if the government decides that, it doesn't want to go down this road of conservation or protection of forests, etc., then nothing will happen. So, Selangor was one example. Actually, what happened after 9th of May was that other states, after they won, Pakatan Harapan won, they also declared a moratorium on logging, which I think is fantastic. Malacca was one of them, Johor as well, and Sabah, I believe, a month or two ago said that they will not be converting their forests into oil palm plantations. So these are positive steps, which I think they also take a lot of input from NGOs like from EcoKnights, from WWF, etc. But they must have the political will, because land is it's a finite resource in Malaysia, and controlled by the states.
Yeah. Yasmin mentioned something very important, which is that our population growth is going to have an impact on the kind of choices that politicians make. Kamal, one reality is that Orang Asli have always been very small communities, and the kind of choices they make are maybe not something that urban populations and nation states can afford. Would you agree?
So back to your earlier question, what can academics do? I think one of the things we can do is provide evidence base in our arguments. We do research, we collect data, and we can use that in argument. Orang Asli are a small population, so in the larger picture of the state, yes, they might not have that strong a voice. So the argument of economic needs need to be tempered with rights. So in this case, customary land. I think there is a need to recognize customary land, and many of these communities today are at the central forest spine. which is a place we need to preserve, to conserve. Yeah, and their presence there allow us that platform to argue for it. But these are also states that are not as wealthy as Selangor, and so they would use the economic argument for the well-being of the state. My question is, if you cut down the trees to create wealth for the state, but you impoverish the people, the state then has to spend more towards meeting the needs of these people. So small as they are, there's still a responsibility that the state has towards them.
Right. And in fact, what we're going to do in the second part, we're going to look at the way the budget frames some environmental protection policies closely associated with the Orang Asli community. And we're going to be back with that. Stay tuned to Let's Talk with me, Sharaad Kuten. Welcome back to Let's Talk with me, Sharaad Kuten. Kamal Suhaimi Fazil from University of Malaya rather. Elizabeth Wong, Adun for Bukit Lanjan, also Yasmin Rasyid from EcoKnights, an NGO working on environmental issues. We were talking about the kind of trade-offs and all, but what's clear now is this government has committed quite a bit of money to issues around the forests. There's a 60 million ringgit allocation for specific projects by state governments to protect and expand existing natural reserves, and that's on the books. Budget 2019 also mentioned a 5 million allocation for micro grants in cooperation with the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, to manage and protect the environment in Orang Asli and Orang Asal communities. And I'm fascinated by this because what Kamal seems to be doing is it ties the environment to the communities that live within those environments. Could you help us understand, why do you think the government, I mean, I know you're not a spokesman for the government, but why do you think the government did this? I mean, who is telling them that they need to think about resources in terms of Orang Asli and Orang Asal communities?
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is my opinion. I think there's a trend today worldwide in talking about protected areas to incorporate local communities, indigenous communities particularly, in the area. And it's not just because they know the lay of the land. That is definitely an important part. It's also about recognizing their affinity to the land. So their identity, their culture, and their spiritual connectivity to the land comes as an integrated, comprehensive package. So I think it's good that the state is recognizing that in having this 5 million through UNDP. But I find that's not enough. There's not enough commitment there. 5 million ringgit would probably go to demonstrate potential, possibility, but you really need to commit more. And I think that's where we need institutional reforms. It's not just about giving money for projects to demonstrate Orang Asli's capacity to, say, document the landscape or identify high, biological, biodiversity value, and all the stuff,
Yeah. I mean, Elizabeth, I mean, there was this issue when you came to power with your colleagues in 2008. Was there a real shift in thinking in government? Were you inheriting a very different worldview when it came to thinking about the environment or thinking Orang Asli in relation to the environment? Could you explain a little bit about what took that change of shift to happen?
When we came into power in 2008 in Selangor, we realized that, for example, there were a lot of Orang Asli land not gazetted, even in 2008, and that is in Selangor. So, and of course, we had zero cooperation from JAKWA, Jabatan Kemajuan Orang Asli. Zero cooperation. They treated us as if we were enemies, and they
treated the state government as enemies.
Me in particular, because I was in charge of Orang Asli. But we had, for example, good people to advise the state government. They included academics, they included activists, and I just so happened I have this background, working with Center for Orang Asli Concerns in the past. So we managed to push quite a lot of reforms. So, for example, the first thing we took about a year, but we managed to pull back some of the lawsuits that the government had filed against Orang Aslis, and also we settled a lot of the Orang Asli cases. Apart from that, we also had some policy changes. So number one is that if we have to make sure that if there's any land to be alienated, there's no Orang Asli, it's not part of the Orang Asli settlement, including their we call it Kawasan Rayau. I'm not sure how you call that in English, but the place where
people roam, is it?
Yes, roaming lands.
Okay.
The third thing was we made sure that because of a lot of these Orang Asli, they live in forests still in Selangor, or at least at the fringes. They also have equal protection. So which means that it's an interesting situation where they can live in the forest, they can set up homes, they can even harvest for their own needs, but they cannot, for example, they cannot cut down trees for commercial purposes.
Or
they
set
cannot
up a casino,
hunt,
maybe.
Yeah, hunt for commercial purposes, and it worked out well. And
okay, we'll come back to some of the issues, including what I want to talk about, the Badan Bertindak Tanah Orang Asli Selangor, BBTOAS. Maybe, Yasmin, we could talk about is the global conversation about the environment, is it in fact increasingly tied to the people who live intimately with the land? Is it, when the films that are shown, the documentaries, is that a theme?
Yeah, I think the recurring theme we see is about the relationship, or how to actually reignite back that relationship many of us in the urban setting have lost with the environment. And I think when you talk about indigenous communities, their values, like you were mentioned, spiritual values or cultural values, or adat as you call it, are very much basically in balance. You take whatever you want, but you leave enough so that you can come back for the next cycle.
Is it somewhat romanticized, you think?
It is, but I think we also need to understand that it's very fundamental, basic needs. And a lot of the documentaries that we've screened at the Kuala Lumpur Eco Film Fest also look into more very community-centric approaches in protecting forest or environment. And why the focus on community is because when you are able to provide the necessary capital for a community, it doesn't matter whether it's natural capital or financial capital, and the assets are there, you're able to, create an empowered community that would be the custodians or caretakers of that
this
area.
is very interesting. They're talking about empowered communities, because I often think of Orang Asli, especially in the peninsula, as being quite culturally quite retreating. They're not aggressive people. They're not necessarily the people you think to do advocacy for even themselves, right? I mean, come on, can you help us understand? I know there's a new generation of Orang Asli leaders, but what did it take for them to become their own advocates?
I think in a lot of places, so that's some of the myths that we have, is that they are timid. They're afraid, shy, Yeah. Yes, to some extent, but also no. It's really hard for us to generalize. For example, the guys who are fighting to protect the forest in Kelantan today are Orang Aslis, and they put up the blockade on their own. They have people maybe coming to support with food and all, but in the end, it's really their initiative, and they do it because they've got nowhere else to go. The forest goes, their livelihood goes downhill, So for us, if logging affects the river and the water, we go back home, we turn on our filters. They go back to their house, they get water from the river. The river is polluted. The children get sick. That's the reality.
But there are some realities also about the Orang Asli community. Often said the detractors will say they're instigated by outside people. Then they also say that some of the ketua are actually in the pay of certain. So they're like everybody else. They're full of their own politics. You have an experience of dealing with Orang Asli leaders. Tell us about the Badan Bertindak Tanah Orang Asli Selangor. Is it still going? It was launched in 2009.
It was launched in 2009. Right now, I was told that they have stopped that because Jakwa has become more open to the state government. We set it up at that time principally to get a group of local leaders, number one, to do community mapping, number two, to be the bridge between the state government and the Orang Asli communities in Selangor. So they did a lot of the work for the state government, in fact, and they were actually very critical, especially when it came to gazetting of their lands, Orang Asli lands in Selangor. But just very quickly, before you go on, I just want to go back to the budget, which Kamal mentioned that it's insufficient.
The 5 million ringgit.
I think I agree with Kamal. It's not sufficient, but it's a good start. But the only problem I have with it is that why do the Orang Asli communities, why do they have to work with NGOs to access that fund?
Yes.
I think that that is maybe the government currently, they feel that they are not able to trust the Orang Asli with such funds.
So can I just add on? So there was a project a few years back in 2007 where EU gave money to the UNDP, and that money was for community forestry in Malaysia. And the UNDP ran it at, what's her name? I forgot the name. But what she did was, she went past the NGOs and went straight to the communities. And so they created CBOs. And the money went straight to, I think...
What's a CBO?
A community-based organization. Okay. So what happens is, when you go through an NGO, the NGO organizes the funds, does the report writing and all that. When you get the community to organize themselves into CBOs, they learn to register themselves. They also learn to organize themselves, and that's where leaderships are born. But it also is fundamentally trust. The funders are willing and able to trust the community to use the money wisely. I thought it was a highly successful project.
Okay, we're going to take a short break now, and we'll be back with a deeper look at the question of the environment. I have with me Yasmin Rasyid, Elizabeth Wong, and Kamal Fazil. We're all going to be focused on the ecology of Malaysia in the next hour. Stay tuned to Let's Talk with me, Sharaad Kuten. Welcome back to Let's Talk with me, Sharaad Kuten. My guests tonight are Elizabeth Wong, Adun for Bukit Lanjan, Yasmin Rasyid for EcoKnights, and Kamal Fazil from University of Malaya. We're talking about the environment and also the people who depend on it, those who depend on very intimately, like the Orang Asli, or the rest of humanity. We all depend on the planet and its resources. Now, Budget 2019 listed this as an aspiration for the government. The government is going to take steps to list the Forest Research Institute of Malaysia, or FRIM, it's a forest park in Selangor, as well as the Royal Belum Perak Forest as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So both those areas are going to be, at least that's the intention. You might not know, many of you here probably do know, that in Selangor we have 4 reserves, the national reserves or state reserves. The Selangor Heritage Park, the Bukit Cahaya Sri Alam Park, the Sungai Dusun Wildlife Reserve, and Templars Park. All these are listed in Wikipedia. Okay, if you need to know. I do want to ask, Kamal, tell us, why is this World Heritage aspiration important? What does it change on the ground?
On the ground, once you get a UNESCO recognition, if places like Royal Belum, you have Orang Aslis living in the park. So currently, the state park takes a step back from. They acknowledge the people are there, but there's very little interaction, or there's very little engaging in the community in managing the park. So a UNESCO recognition will require, or will at least put pressure on the state park to start acknowledging the indigenous within Belum as their customary land. And I hope that will bring it towards co-management of the landscape.
Right, so before we get into that, so really up the ante on the way those parks are managed. Yasmin, there's a very interesting thing about parks, and you hear in some of the international discussions now, Donald Trump quite famously kind of wanting to push back on national parks in the US, for instance. Obama famously wanting to, in his last years, trying to create more national parks. What is the record for Malaysia? Are we, on balance, actually a country that's done quite well in terms of preserving this, creating? I think in Sabah we have one of the biggest marine parks in the world. What's our score? How would you rate us?
I think we can do better. But I would like to resonate what Kamal was saying as well. At the end of the day, it's how much inclusivity and how much participation you allow to come up from the bottom up. At the end of the day, with a UNESCO heritage tagline on it, means no one's left out. Everyone's voice is taken into consideration and has a role to play in the whole economics of that whole site as well. So on paper, on theory, it's wonderful, it's beautiful. You've got to make sure everyone is being taken care of. But like I said, it's a good aspiration. It's good that there's a budget. It's not cheap to get a UNESCO heritage site. But we've got a very interesting case right up in Langkawi right now, the geopark. which it has been threatened to have its status.
Oh, they haven't lost it
I
yet.
don't think we've lost it. We almost lost it, and then we got it back up again. But it's once you get a status, the next level, the next level of difficulty would be how do you maintain it, and how do you make sure it brings prosperity to everyone, where conservation and development and tourism and income all jives together and makes sense for everyone.
Okay, I want to bring in the question of tourism shortly, but I do want to pick up on something you said, Yasmin, the question of beauty. I mean, there's something about these parks, right? And whether in your outreach to younger people or older people as well, in trying to persuade them to change their minds about the environment, the question of natural beauty plays a part.
Yeah.
Is it a big part of the gambit? Because when you look at Instagram and you go, I mean, aren't people taken by it and think, wow, this is something I want to preserve, the Great Barrier Reef, or so on and so forth?
No, I think we're more dissociated from the nature or the beauty of things. We ran a survey with about 600 data points on rivers. 50% of our respondents have never enjoyed going to a river before. And we were like, what's going on here? And we looked at the demographics, the breakdown age. They're from 21 to 40 years old. And I was like, how do you make this generation start protecting our rivers for the sake of protecting the beauty when they've never been to a river before?
Or if you have been to, say, Sungai Penchala, that's a river you don't want to step into. Yeah.
But actually, it's not true. At the
and its source is beautiful.
At the source is great. It's grade A.
Okay, so this is and that's a very interesting survey. Ellie, there is a connection, it seems, between protecting the environment and the economics of tourism, right? Tourism is something. I mean, you can sell your natural beauty. How did that work for you in trying to kind of bring those two things together?
Well, in Selangor, we have two sites which are, we call it, they are on the tentative list. One is Frim, another one which they left out from the budget, not Wikipedia, from the budget, is the Gombak Quartz Ridge, which is the longest quartz ridge in the world. Very, very beautiful, but you're not supposed to climb it.
So isn't there a problem with the Gombak Quartz Ridge in terms of the high-speed rail link? Is that one of the reasons?
No, the high-speed rail is not there.
It wouldn't impact.
No, high-speed rail is from Singapore to Kuala Lumpur.
Sorry, not the high-speed rail, the East Coast ECRL.
Yes, which is why Selangor government from day one has been adamant. During my time, none of us were even consulted. We were not even asked about it. They just, broke ground and launched it. So we said no way they would be
So the
allowed
ECRL could, in fact, damage this natural.
It will kill our chances, totally.
To list it as a World Heritage.
Yeah, because we have not gotten the status yet. So UNESCO Heritage, even the fact that it's on the tentative list, it gives a certain form of protection. And if we do get it, that's even better. And what happens is that we have to submit to UNESCO a conservation management plan, whether it is the geoparks or the Quartz Ridge or Frim or Belum. And this is, using that document, UNESCO will be checking on us all the time. So I think it's good. I mean, sure, there'll be some trickle-down effects, whether it's for the people around those areas or for the economy, but I think the most important thing that we should be looking for, in all these listings would be protection and conservation.
Yasmin, I want to ask you about this, again, this paradox, right? When you're kind of trying to get people to rethink their relationship to the planet, you say, well, go out and see the natural beauty. People are now traveling and, and they're polluting the world as they go to experience the natural beauty. How do you deal with this paradox? What do you say to people? Don't go, just look at it on Google, How do you work through the contradictions that we seem to be faced?
It's hard. It's hard not to get those Instagrammable moments at the same time, But I think it has to be done with a lot more consciousness. For me, I do it with my kids, so I feel like I'm able to share and trickle down this education to them, and hopefully they're not those that would be trampling on coral reefs or picking up a turtle in the sea irresponsibly. I can only do it, I guess, one person at a time. But I'm a strong advocate for just leave it as it is.
Don't visit.
Yeah, there's a lot on BBC. There's a lot on Planet Earth. enjoy it, and if you're lucky, you get to see it with your eyes. Yes, good. But if not,
Sorry, I think, yeah, I mean, it's great, but people do want to go. But I think what we can do is up our enforcement, park rangers, park management.
Okay, on this score, Kamal, I know you have some ideas about the way in which the Orang Asli community can be integrated into enforcement.
Yeah, so one of the problems with parks and state parks or national parks and ecotourism is that it tends to benefit people with capacity, and usually the local communities are left out of the the benefits that come with ecotourism. They also don't usually get employed in the state and agencies like the state parks again, because they don't meet the qualification. But these are the guys who know the area best, and they are the guys who know they know the lay of the ground. Yeah, so in the institutional reforms I was referring to just now, part of it is actually, can we think of reforming the state parks and say the wildlife department to have an enforcement unit or rangers made up of Orang Asli, like how the police did it in the 50s with the Senoi Perak, where Orang Aslis can join not on a contract basis or at the lower end of the rung, but rather they have employment, they have a pathway, a career pathway with a pension at the end. And this can incorporate into their long-term development.
Is this kind of institutional reform difficult?
No, it's not. So, for example, just going back to Orang Asli, so the state, for example, the states have Jakwa in Semenanjung. My Orang Asli team are underqualified to join Jakwa or the state government because they only have maybe Form 3, Form 5 education, but they are good organizers, they are good, communicators. So what we did was we call it an EXCO paper, a paper which is approved at the state cabinet, the state EXCO, and it's all systems go from there.
Which allows them to enter into the service.
Into the service, and they get benefits. It's a contract. It's a contract, but they get to serve the state government. So it can be done.
And they serve in a technical capacity. They are mapping.
Yes, correct.
Right. Okay, we're going to come back to that. Stay tuned to Let's Talk with me, Sharaad Kuten. Welcome back to Let's Talk with me, Sharaad Kuten. Kamal Suhaimi Fazil from University Malaya, Elizabeth Wong, Adun for Bukit Lanjan, and Yasmin Rasyid from EcoKnights. They're all here to talk about the environment. And we can move away a little from the issue around the Orang Asli to the question of pollution and plastic. Because it's often a kind of headliner, right? We've had nanoplastics and microplastics. We also have the question of importing plastics now, and what are we doing with that. Now, in budget 2019, the government said it wants to attract environmentally friendly investments to reduce the usage of conventional plastics, and they propose a pioneer status incentive of some 70% or investments allowance of some 60% for 5 years to be granted to companies that produce environmentally friendly plastics based on bioresin and biopolymers. Yasmin, I don't know the science of it, but is plastic still plastic? Is pollution still pollution? If it was all bioresin or biopolymer-based plastics, would it make a difference to the issue of pollution?
I think it's still, the issue here, it's still a plastic bag, or at least the concept of a plastic bag. So I'm not really a fan of it. And when you talk about bioresins, it's still some kind of output being put out there in the environment. Whether it's OXO or additives and so on and so forth, and it's how do I say this? I think it's about time we put a hard stop to certain things. I'm not sure how that's going to be done. Just 2 weeks ago, microplastics have been found in human gut, which means it's come the whole, it's done the whole circular economy. It's back into our stomachs again. And it's going to get a pretty, the future outlook, it's going to get pretty bad if you're looking at an average person like you and me. I'm sure we've got some microplastics, because if you consume seafood, you've definitely got a bit of it in you.
And who knows, it could be in the air as well.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, trade-offs, government. So the government's intention here seems pretty laudable, right? Green technologies, ecologically friendly technologies and products, but is there a kind of missing step? We're not really thinking this through. Yasmin seems to be quite skeptical about these moves, even though...
I am skeptical as well.
Why are you skeptical?
Because, when it comes... there's a lot of green marketing and greenwashing. I mean, let me just put it very bluntly.
Like whitewashing, greenwashing.
Yes, that's right. Because, you know, we started Selangor no plastic bag policy about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
It's been, I forgot, so long ago. And sure, we know a lot of people approached us with their bags and their whatever, and then we realized that all these so-called biodegradable bags and whatever bags, actually they are plastic bags, except that they have certain components of, you know, bioresins or organic materials. So at the end of the day, it is still a plastic bag. When it biodegrades, for example, if it ever does, you know, under sunlight and certain conditions, it will still break down into plastic. So that's where we decided about 3 years ago not to go down that road, which is we decided not to have alternatives, not to suggest anyone, you know, to replace with anything unless it's paper. But even that we didn't like the idea because, you know, where do you get paper from?
Yeah. From forests.
That's right. So that's why we said, you know, carry your own bag. So we wanted to start a new conversation, a new culture.
It's not about just getting out there with greener products or innovating new products. How come we're not asking ourselves, what is it about us that needs to change? What about the way we consume that needs to be looked at differently? What is this lifestyle that we have that is pretty much unsustainable? And no one's really talking about it because a lot of us don't want to give it up.
How do the Orang Asli do? Because I know they're very practical people, right? And they you know, they participate in the market economy to the extent they need to, but they also value their kinship systems. They value the kind of culture that comes out of egalitarianism. And they're radically egalitarian, largely, aren't they, Orang Asli? How
yes and no.
Okay. How do you make sense of issues like consumerism?
So I think a lot of things are changing. There are a lot of factors that are changing the Orang Asli way of life. That whole egalitarian, pragmatic, right, is being replaced today with the pragmatic. The same reasons we use plastic, other reasons they use plastic. It's easy. It carries stuff. It you know. And it's a throwable, throw away. You can go get another plastic bag.
But they're smart. They don't put it in the landfill. You know, they don't put it with like the waste. They burn it.
I'm not sure if that's
better.
Well, it gets rid of, you know, evidence. Yes.
But what you have, sorry, guys, so what you have also now in a lot of Orang Asli villages, because they don't have the kind of garbage disposal that you know comes and collects their rubbish. So a lot of the villages have piles of rubbish around them. Yeah. And it can be sardine tins or plastic bags and stuff. So it's just around the village. And
are they bothered by it?
I'm bothered by it. I'm not sure if they're bothered by it. But I think these are some of the problems with planned development that doesn't quite look into solid waste disposal, drainage system. So you have people being resettled now, living in. So more people are living together, but they're not really solving the issues that come with living together.
Okay, Yasmin, you said you did a survey. 50% of people have never seen a river or never dipped their foot in.
Never been to one. Yeah, never been to one.
A river. Now, what are the challenges? I mean, you are in environmental education, raising awareness. What are the roadblocks? You know, you might be distributing your information using, you know, WhatsApp or cell phones. Rare earth elements are used, and you know where that comes from, right? So how do you sort out the contradictions? Here we are trying to save the planet using a technology that's actually you know, polluting the planet.
Oh, well, I mean, to be honest, no one's a superhero. You can't completely eradicate. You're not like Thanos. You can, like, you know, snap your fingers and everyone unsustainable, go away. It doesn't work that way. But with us, we focus a lot of our work with children and youth. And we use a lot of more, I guess, a little more tactical approach in looking at how it's not just delivering education and awareness, it's about getting them to work with the community. So a lot of our camps, a lot of our sustainability, leadership development programs are about trying to get them to look at a problem-solving or design thinking approach. And all of the participants, normally 90% of them get an opportunity to work specifically with the community, to be able to cross that cultural barrier, cross that language barrier or racial barrier, to understand how environment is viewed more holistically. And that's how we deliver our programs. And we also track, I guess, the evolution of their mindsets over the years. When we were only 14 years old, but some kids that have been in our programs are right now post-university. So it's interesting to actually look at how they move as well, how their mindsets have developed, or whether they come back again as volunteers, interns, or staff. So we're focusing a lot on how to raise this new consciousness. It's very intangible, I know, but I can't think of any other way than to pack in a bit of emotion, to pack in a bit of CQ, cultural intelligence. Everyone's got their good IQ already. EQ needs to be worked on a little bit, maybe.
But CQ very low, is it?
CQ is very low.
Politicians and policymakers, I mean, not to speak directly about your colleagues, but is there that CQ, is there the EQ or any Q that's allowing them to see what the problem really is?
I think my colleagues have a lot on their plate. So, and look, it's only been 5 months, 5 or 6 months. So there's going to be a lot of, catching up.
Well, in the state of Selangor, they've had 2 terms already. So this is going to be a third term.
It's a lot more stable. So we've moved, to a different level of planning and policy. So existing policies are already there that we've made in the last 10 years. So now it's like, how do we improve it? How do we improve conservation? How do we improve, say, the No Plastic Bag campaign? The new EXCO for Environment just made a decision as well to, saying that he's going to start educating people on, plastic straws, and eventually those will be banned in the state as well. So, I think there's some, improvements incrementally, slowly, but
okay. So as the planet rushes towards the tipping point, we're moving incrementally.
There's no choice. I mean, seriously, we talk about simple things that these, for example, these the discussions on low carbon cities. These are so new in Malaysia, smart cities so new. And we started. I think we were the first to start in Selangor 2 years ago. We started doing energy audits 2 years ago, before federal government. We've audited more buildings than they have. Rainwater harvesting, and we are very slow compared to, say, other countries. Even Singapore. Okay,
we're running out of time. We're going to be back with a roundup, kind of wish list from my guests, Kamal, Elizabeth, and Yasmin, going to tell us what they want from this new government and what they want from the new Malaysia. Stay tuned to Let's Talk with me, Sharaad Kuten. Welcome back to Let's Talk with me, Sharaad Kuten. Yasmin Rasyid from EcoKnights, Elizabeth Wong, Adun from Bukit Lanjan, also Kamal Suhaimi Fazil from University Malaya. We're talking about the environment, and it's time for the wish list. So the wish list, not just for government, because we constantly go to government, ask them things, but we can also wish for ourselves and for our fellow Malaysians something. Elizabeth, let's start with you. What's your wish list for, at least on the in terms of the environment, in terms of the ecological sustainability of our development plans? What would you wish for?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that, for example, the marine parks in Malaysia are underutilized and under-resourced, especially funds from federal government. And there's a need to really protect these marine parks and also gazette more marine parks. So first on my wish list is for the marine parks to remain under the Ministry of Natural Resource, because there's a tussle, fishery wants it, agriculture wants it, but it should be under natural resource, because at least the Ministry of Natural Resource has, some kind of conservation track in its work.
Second, why has it been under-resourced? When we talk about under-resourced, you're talking about the personnel, enforcement, research?
Funding, research, everything. Because I think people, especially in government in the past, they don't see that as something important, something, that's worth putting a lot of money into. So that's one. The second thing would be, I would really hope that the new government, especially the federal government, will look into a better managed no plastic bag campaign. Start having interactions and discussions, especially with the NGOs and community groups who've been working on zero waste policies, and as well as zero waste activism. The third thing...
Okay, you've had 2 so far. I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to come back to you. But
Can I interject?
Yes, come on.
So
you can take away her wish.
Totally great. Marine parks, but we also need to think of land development that affects marine parks. So a lot of us think about marine parks as water bodies, and we zone them and all this stuff, right? And that has problems, because especially if we don't talk to local communities and see how they use the seas,
the artisanal fishing methods and all that.
That's right, and how it contrasts with bigger fishing trawlers and stuff, but also how we're developing the land. So we might have oil palm on the land, we might have mining,
and it leaches into the sea.
And we're not looking at that, and we're not looking
it's
at
all connected.
Parks, marine parks, and landscape.
Okay, so this is what Santa would call a supplementary wish to somebody else's wish. Well, Santa's going to come back to you, Kamal. Yasmin,
write this all down.
Yasmin, what's your wish for this government in terms of the environment?
In terms, in the next decade or two, I think the percentage of population in cities will increase. The urban sprawl will intensify. And I think it's a perfect opportunity to look at how, like, for this new government to look at fundamentally setting the right policies. The right policies are in place, maybe better enforcement or better law to make sure everyone follows, whether it's energy efficiency, whether it's public transportation, traffic, vehicle use, emission. I think that is, majority of us are going to be the city anyway. So the stress on the city is quite high, water use, and then your air pollution and all that.
So you don't see any of that in place at the moment, or even a kind of a gesture towards managing our cities better?
We have a few local authorities, even DBKL and PPJ is quite forward with a few of their low carbon city framework initiatives, but it's not trickling to the everyday person on the ground yet. Like what's my responsibility? Do I know anything about what my footprint is? Am I more vigilant, or am I more careful about how I use water, because I know how cities stressed out resources and all that? So it's not going down to the masses yet. I think we need more strategic communication. We've always talked about SEPA, right, in the government, communication, education, whatever, public awareness, SEPA. It's a lot of money spent there to communicate, but you can't use conventional ways of like a basic billboard now that says "Sayangilah sungai kita," right? It doesn't really work anymore.
Yeah, because 50% of people don't want to dip their into their much loved rivers. Kamal,
the work they do with children is amazing. It's fantastic. It needs to go to all schools.
Yes.
The KL Eco Film Festival needs to go out, maybe a category for high school competition. So I work with a homeschool in YCK, and they recently got an award from them. And these kids, to get that documentary, they put in a documentary on the river of the Gombak River, the life of the Gombak River, right? But to get there, they had to go through months of research, and they dipped their feet in the river.
Oh gosh!
Despite us saying, maybe not that river. But they went up to the Gombak source, further up to the source where the river was really clean, and they saw how it got polluted as populations increase. And they also learned that highways pollute rivers because people throw things out of the car and stuff like that. Kids learn fantastically in the field, and I think
give them a good camera.
Okay, so you've got now 2 supplementary wishes on. What about your own? What's your own wish, Kamal?
Institutional reforms. Wildlife Department and state parks should hire orang asli. That's one, so they get jobs, but not just as spotters or the sort of entry level. They should be at an executive and officers level position, rangers. Even if they don't meet the requirement, like Ellie said, perhaps the state can issue out an authoritative letter that allows them to be employed. Preferably, we can get employment with long-term, with career pathways and pensions rather than contract. If that could be a sort of leg up to the orang asli community, that would be great. Otherwise, because the trend now is privatization and all that, so they're contract-based. But if those contract employment can give them certification that allow them to go to other employments, so it bypasses an academic qualification.
Right, and the reason to have orang asli would be local knowledge, their survival skills, their ability to train others, and so on and so forth.
That's right.
Okay, what do you think is going to be the biggest hurdle, Elizabeth, in the coming years to actually getting this wish list going? I mean, is it a lack of political will? Is it a constrained budget? What is it that will, in fact, thwart any attempt for real change?
I think first would be finance, because any government would look into resource allocation. So of course they would prefer to put into places where they feel they get a big bang for their buck. For example, welfare, good publicity, things like that. or education. That's when, you know, environment, climate change, Orang Asli, you know, normally those departments or those, you know, sections of the government, they get very little money. Wildlife, especially wildlife department.
Yeah.
So, you know, if this government, in this new government, we need champions. We need people to speak up and say, look, we deserve so much. Certain percentage of it should go into conservation, to wildlife, to marine parks, to, you know, Orang Asli, so on and so forth. But is that going to happen? So we have to fight for it.
Okay, so we have champions on the other end. You work with young people. Do they despair? There's a lot of bad news out there for young people about their future. You know, people saying we've reached the tipping point, you know, in 14 years it's going to be irreversible. Do you find that young people despair about their own future and are saying, well, why bother?
Well, I've seen a mixture of both. There are those exactly how you described them, and then there's a lot more opportunities to mold them to be more hopeful Malaysians. And we're banging on that, you know, if we can raise a champion at a time who can be more conscious about this, at least we're holding on to something. I mean, it sounds like such a bleak future, Sharaad. To a large extent, I think it will be. So we're just trying to figure out how we can raise an army that's a bit more conscious.
And therefore, EcoKnights, not night and day, but knights like, you know.
Shining armor.
No, knights in shining armor. Come on, you work with young people too. Well, what's your sense of their relationship to the future?
So I work with young people who are a bit more disadvantaged or marginalized. But I work closely with kids. And I think good working relationship, mentorship allows for children to see hope. On their own children, I don't think they see despair so much, but they might not see hope either. But bring them out of the city, like the work with homeschooling children. They go out to the river. They are in an urban landscape. Now they're going into the forest. They went trekking in Kuala Kubu Baru, Sungai Pertak. You know, they get to see the landscape, and it's something for them. It's something that they can then reflect on. That, oh, there's this thing, we can enjoy ourselves this way, rather than going to the internet cafe or just playing video games.
Shopping mall.
Or the shopping mall. So, you know, I think children are full of potential, and it's really something we need mentors to nurture.
Starts with your parents, though.
Yeah, but can I just say about Orang Asli as well?
You have it like 2 seconds.
Orang Asli, one thing, we need to recognize land rights. Fundamentally, it's not about giving jobs, it's about recognizing land rights and co-managing protected areas together.
Okay, we're going to have a show just on the Orang Asli. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here this evening. I've been speaking to Yasmin Rasyid, Elizabeth Wong, and Kamal Sohaimi Fazil, all of them champions in their own right for a better future for Malaysia. Stay tuned, or rather, come back every night at 10 p.m. for Let's Talk with me, Sharaad Kuten, only on Astro Awani.